Hi, I'm Jacob Hornberger, president of the Future of Freedom Foundation, and this is this week's issue of the Libertarian Angle. Great to be back with y'all, and I'm pleased, as always, to be joined by my co-host, Richard Ebeling, who teaches economics at the Citadel. And, well, Richard, welcome back.
It's great to be here with you and our special guest this week.
Yeah, we got a little modified format this week. We decided to invite James Bovard to join us on the show. And James has been a longtime policy advisor at the Future of Freedom Foundation, noted author, writer. He's been published all over the place, Wall Street Journal, a bunch of mainstream publications. And he's a real muckraker type. And he's been a good friend for, over 20 years now. And Jim, welcome to the Libertarian Angle for joining Richard and me.
Hey, Jacob, thanks very much for having me on. I've got to say, though, I'm disappointed that Richard is not wearing a Clemson hat right now, since Clemson won the National Football Championship last night. And Richard is now a professor at Citadel. And, you know, I just figured everybody in South Carolina would be wearing a Clemson hat today.
Well, at least it was the lead piece on all the local Charleston news shows this morning. So, yes, it was a big to-do. But the Citadel has its own football team, and so they keep rooting for their own football team.
Well, okay. Well, all right. Next show, I hope to see you wearing a Citadel football emblem, since I know how much you love sports.
Absolutely, I live for it, just like I live for, giving my income and my life to government.
Next year.
All right, guys, I thought we would use this particular show to talk about where we've been with the Obama administration and where everybody thinks we're going with the Trump administration. Jim, I'll start with you. We started out with President Obama getting the Nobel Peace Prize, and I know you've written a great piece in the USA Today last week that started out with that fact that he got the Nobel Peace Prize. I mean, this was a monumental achievement, right? That President Obama's efforts toward peace, isn't that why they gave him the Nobel Peace Prize? And how do you feel that has panned out over the 8 years of his administration?
Well, damn, I wasn't expecting to start out with such a difficult question. As far as an honor, I mean, he was given that Nobel Peace Prize for his pre-election rhetoric. I mean, there were a lot of things that Obama said in 2007, 2008. It sounded like he'd be a big change from the George W. Bush administration. Folks were very hopeful, and the folks in Norway and Sweden were basically suckered by that and gave him the award. And as soon as he got the award, what he did was announce he was going to triple the number of American troops in Afghanistan. And over 1,000 Americans have died there for no good reason. The country's still totally corrupt and very oppressive. Most folks are not aware that under Obama, the U.S. is currently bombing 7 different nations. And there was a very good left-wing video shortly before the election, I think it was done by Fusion, in which it was going around asking people with the camera and the video, which countries is America bombing? And most people were like, oh, I don't know. But the thing that would have been great is if the same film crew could have staked out on Capitol Hill and forced a bunch of congressmen as they're going to their fundraising gigs, force them to answer the same question. How many congressmen could name all 7 nations that the U.S. is bombing under Obama? I don't think it'd be very many. And most of them would kind of say, well, the president has a right to do that. Not quite what James Madison intended when he made the Constitution. So, but it's fascinating to me that there's been so little controversy about Obama's warmongering, because he has bombed hell out of a lot of different places in the world, none of which have made direct attacks on the U.S., and yet folks assume it's all simply another expression of American good intentions, except when we happen to blow up a wedding party in Yemen or Pakistan.
Richard?
I think that what Jim is emphasizing is very important, in that there's been created this illusion that because of his rhetoric, both before and after he was elected, that Obama represented this figure of peace and global harmony and a diminishment of America's aggressive diplomatic and military foreign policy of intruding into other countries and their affairs. But in fact, that has been exactly the opposite. In fact, he has been the king of bombing other countries. I don't know that you can compare it. Certainly not even Bush comes anywhere near the using of drones for these attacks on both military as well as either intentional or unintentional civilian targets that have cost the lives of hundreds, probably thousands of people. He basically has taken war to a new level in which we now fight wars that are not worth dying for, but worth killing for. Because basically with drones, it becomes a computer game in which you're never really threatened. Other than this inanimate object known as the plane may be shot down. But the United States is faced with minimal casualties, but has the capacity to destroy and ruin human lives and personal property in the process. This is a terrible precedent for future presidents, unless there were to be a major shift in foreign policy directions.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And one thing I want to follow up on that is one of the good things that Obama did when he came into office was he opened up the files on some of George W. Bush's secret power grabs. There were secret memos the Bush administration had written to justify torture, wiretapping, and martial law. And in the first couple of months in office, President Obama made those public. And, you know, there were dozens of Americans that were paying attention, and they were shocked at how much power the Bush team had grabbed. And part of what's most surprising about Obama, who has portrayed himself as a professor of constitutional law, is that he has all these power grabs. And going back to what Richard said about these drones, I mean, President Obama has basically established a presidential right to kill based on secret orders, secret memos, and we don't know how and why that the Fifth Amendment no longer applies, because this does include Americans. There was a prominent case in 2011 of a guy who had been born, I think, in New Mexico, and who was targeted. He'd gone over to Yemen. He was an American citizen, and the ACLU and his father filed court cases to force the U.S. government to disclose the evidence on which it was planning to kill him. The people, the Obama administration said it was all state secrets, and they went and killed him anyhow. And there have been other Americans killed, and probably more than what we know of. But it's one of Obama's most important legacies, this presidential right to kill. And it's been enshrouded in secrecy, and it would be great if Donald Trump comes in and opens up the files on these memos and some of the other secretive laws and rulings that Obama's made. That would be a great first step for Trump.
Yes, there's been an immense number of contradictions, inconsistencies, and hypocrisies. One has been is that there has been a huge, outcry about Europeans or Americans who have gone over to the Middle East to join and participate in Middle Eastern conflicts on the side of the Islamic State. And that's, this is evil, we have to stop these citizens. But the hypocrisy is that there's been no willingness or interest in stopping those Europeans or Americans who have chosen to cross from Turkey into Iraq, or especially Syria, and fight on the Kurdish side against the Islamic State. In other words, it's all right for Americans to go and fight in foreign wars and choose sides, as long as it's a side that the United States government approves of. But rather than saying, anyone as a private citizen could go do this, or no private citizen can do this, they basically cherry pick who they consider the good guys and the bad guys in terms of allowing U.S. citizens to leave the country and participate in other wars not involving the United States.
Well, that's a very good point. And one of the biggest paradoxes of the Syria intervention was that the U.S. has been providing arms to groups that were basically on her terrorist watch list. Folks have been formally recognized as terrorist groups. And there was a story in the L.A. Times a while back that pointed out that there's so much chaos in U.S. policy that the Pentagon-backed CIA, the Pentagon-backed Syrian rebels were fighting the CIA-backed Syrian rebels. And U.S. has really no idea what the hell we're doing. And it would also be great if Trump could open up the files on Syria, because what the heck was the U.S. doing? I'm sure that there were intelligence analysts and CIA and elsewhere that said, this is knuckleheaded. Why are we doing this? Likewise for Libya. Why did we bomb Libya? Let's have the information. Put it out in public. I mean, Trump is being vilified for so many different things at this point. The best response he can make is to open the files. Let's learn about Syria, Libya, and drone killings. Because otherwise it's just going to be, anyhow, those would be very healthy for American democracy, no matter what Trump does afterwards.
Well, I think that would serve two purposes if the incoming administration were to do that. A, it would give the American people and others in the world the facts about the reality of U.S. policies. At the same time, I think it would maybe make people think twice before they only vilify a man who has not yet been actually put into the White House, as opposed to then having this angelic image of the man who has been president for the last 8 years. It would help arouse the idea of reluctance to praise and a greater sense of suspicion of anyone who is in the White House who goes beyond the bounds of the strict limits of the executive authority under the original Constitution.
Yeah, sounds great. Jacob, are you still there?
Yeah, I'm still there. One of the most amusing aspects of this whole thing has been the election. That it was clear that everybody was convinced, starting with Obama and going to Hillary Clinton, that she was going to win this election. I mean, they had no doubts. And it was funny watching Obama talk in terms of that he needed to have his legacy protected, whatever that meant. But I think really what he meant was that he wanted his secrets protected, and he wanted the foreign policy that he had established with more bombs and more drone assassinations and more regime change operations continued. And there's absolutely no doubt that Clinton was moving in that direction, as well as ginning up crises and hostilities toward Russia. And so all of a sudden, their worst nightmare happens. Trump comes in, as you point out, Jim. I mean, this guy has the ability to open up their records. And, I mean, they may put some of these things through the shredding machine. But I don't think he can do it, like, with respect to the justification for these assassinations. As you'll recall, he said that he came up with legal opinions justifying these extrajudicial killings. Well, they're not going to be able to shred those legal opinions. Otherwise, where does that leave him with respect to the killings? And so Trump has an opportunity to say, hey, let's open up all these records. Because as you point out, Jim, this is just, well, I'll point it out, it's really just murder. I mean, they're killing people without going through any due process at all. That's something the Fifth Amendment prohibits. This is what our founding fathers, the framers, tried to protect us against. That is, a government that has the power to kill people without giving them notice, without giving them an opportunity to be heard, without a trial. I mean, everything has been thrown out the window with respect to that Fifth Amendment and due process when it comes to killing with these drone assassinations. And people can say, well, they're only doing it to foreigners. Well, the Fifth Amendment says anybody. It doesn't limit it to American citizens. But equally important, they do have the power to assassinate Americans. I mean, that's what this whole war on terrorism has been establishing. That's what they did to Anwar al-Awlaki. That's what they did to his 16-year-old son. Both were American citizens. Both were assassinated by the national security establishment. And then another point is that, Obama came into office with all of these highfalutin things, principles of civil liberties, and talking about, foreign policy. And, I don't know if you all recall this, but libertarians had some hope that maybe this man was going to shift America in a different direction. And then lo and behold, he ends up just following whatever Bush did. I mean, really, Obama's been 8 more years of the George W. Bush administration. And so the question we have to ask is why? I mean, he doesn't even end up closing Guantanamo, which he promised to do 8 years ago. And I think this is a testament to the power of the national security establishment, the power of the Pentagon, the CIA, the NSA. There's a great book called National Security and Double Government by a professor from Tufts named Michael Glennon. Glennon I think he gets it right. He says the real power of this government is with the national security establishment. They let the president, the Congress, and the judiciary maintain the facade of being in control. They let them have that, but it's like a fig leaf. But the real power, the people that are really running this country, are those in the Pentagon, the CIA, and the NSA. And I think that is reflected by the fact that Obama just continued the 8 years of bombing and killing and regime change operations and drone assassinations, and actually expanded them that Bush had begun.
Well, I think that's actually one of the reasons why the Washington establishment has been so apoplectic about Trump's attitude towards these statements and issuances from the intelligence community, because he's basically said, I don't believe it. I have my own sources or my own judgments. I don't want their daily briefings. I will make a decision as to how I want to use it or not. And this is a shock to them, because he's sort of the guy who's rocking the boat and threatens to challenge, delegitimize, and even ignore what they argue and what they want. And I think that has been a major reason of the antagonism towards him. Now, I'm not expecting him to be a non-interventionist in foreign policy in any way, shape, or form. But the fact that he wants to downplay their role and significance and the acceptance by the executive of their advice and judgment and informed knowledge is frightening and disturbing to them, because it threatens the foundation upon which they function, operate, and have their own personal rice bowls.
Yeah, to take a step back to what Jacob was saying about Obama, he's been a huge disappointment on civil liberties and on foreign policy. In some ways, he's not been as bad as George W. Bush as far as dragging us into major wars. And, somebody was asking me recently if there was anything Obama did that I liked, and I said, Obama resisted the push to go to war with Iran. And that is one of the best things. He was under so much pressure, from the Washington media, from a lot of the political establishment. And, he was able to say no, at least on that score. And on Syria, his policy is bad. It's nitwitty. But it's interesting to see what the liberals and so much of the Washington Post and other establishment has pushed. There's been this huge effort to portray the Syrian civil war as a genocide in progress. And there was a young girl who was said to be sending out Twitter messages in the city of Aleppo, and she was said that she was Anne Frank of Syria, and it was a great human rights crime that the U.S. was not intervening to stop this horrible civil war. At least Obama did not massively intervene in Syria, even though the U.S. did drop 12,000 bombs there last year, which is horrible. But it's interesting to see how much worse the Washington Post and so much of the media and political establishment was on foreign policy than what Obama did in Syria and Iran, which is not to exonerate Obama at all. But it's just interesting that the baseline in Washington is that people here have not learned a damn thing from George W. Bush. It's simply more war, more bombing, and the U.S. needs to dominate and drop bombs to spread democracy.
Yes, and I think that to just highlight that last thing that Jim was saying, if one has followed the unsigned editorials in, for example, the New York Times and the Washington Post, or many of their regular weekly columnists, those who typically would be considered American liberals or on the left, who are always supposedly suspicious of American empire, American overreach, critical of much that George W. Bush did, and in many cases rightly. What has been sort of like a party line over all of them over the last few weeks? Oh, Trump is challenging the post-World War II international order. America needs to be the policeman of the world. America has to be the political leader to maintain international stability and organization. So they all come out now. Once someone actually, at least in rhetoric, says that he questions or doubts that America should or will play this role, they all show their hands as international social engineers and political paternalist manipulators on a global scale. So it's not that they're against these interventions. They just want these international or foreign interventions to be in the hands of the people that they approve of and who they trust to do the right thing.
Yeah, and to amplify on what Richard's talking about, I mean, you've got this Russia controversy right in the middle of all this. I mean, the national security establishment, ever since the end of the Cold War, has needed big official enemies to maintain the justification for its existence. Remember, this was a Cold War apparatus. The CIA, the big military-industrial complex, the NSA, all justified in the name of the Soviet threat, the anti-communist crusade, that the communists were coming to get us. And then the Cold War ends. Well, then people obviously start asking, well, why shouldn't there be a peace dividend? Why not lower the amount spent on the military? And I think the national security establishment, for them, the Cold War never ended. I mean, they needed to have this giant threat coming from Russia or China or whatever. Now, in the interim, they come up with the war on terrorism. They go into the Middle East. They start bombing countries, invading countries, sanctions, and so forth that generates the constant threat of terrorism. But that's dissipating. And if the troops come out of the Middle East and Afghanistan, they know that all of a sudden that terrorist threat disappears. Well, look what they did after the end of the Cold War. They maintained NATO in existence, even though the Warsaw Pact had expired, even though Germany was united. They keep NATO in existence. They start gobbling up former Warsaw Pact countries. They move all the way up to Ukraine. I mean, they knew this was going to provoke a crisis. And all of a sudden, Trump comes in and says, I'm not interested in any fights with Russia. I'm interested in making friends. I don't see any reason why we can't just get along with each other. This is anathema to them. He is threatening the entire concept that undermines the national security establishment, and that is this constant threat from whether the Soviet Union or Russia or what have you. And Jim, you know, they argue that, this is what he should have done in Syria. They should have gone in and taken over the country. But that's exactly what they did in Iraq. That's exactly what they did in Libya. They won. They ousted the dictator. They killed the dictator. And look what that produced. Massive chaos, violence, ISIS, civil war in Libya. The same thing would have happened in Syria. So it's really just a testament to this, or a negative testament to the whole concept of foreign interventionism. And let me just wrap up by saying that Medea Benjamin had a great article that we linked to in our FFF Daily last week, where she said that in 2016, President Obama had dropped 26,000 plus bombs in the Middle East and maybe Afghanistan too, I'm not sure. She said that that's 3 bombs a minute every hour, 24 hours a day for the entire year of 2016. That's what Obama's legacy is. And we can only hope that Donald Trump moves things in a different direction, even if he isn't a non-interventionist.
Well, it's interesting you're talking about Syria, and as a good example, but, you know, Syria, there was never any reason to expect that the U.S. intervening or toppling the Assad government would have a happy ending. There was a Syrian journalist, a lady, Rania, well, it's Arabic name, which I would butcher pronouncing even worse than Gary Johnson would. She was over in Syria just before the U.S. election, and she sent out a tweet, and she said that she had been talking to Syrian people and asking who they wanted to see win the U.S. presidential election. And it was overwhelming that they wanted to see Trump win because they felt Trump was less likely to bomb them. And, you know, a lot of Americans talk about foreign policy as an abstraction. And here we got people in a hard-hit foreign country who were watching the American election results and wondering, am I going to die? Am I going to die because the new president's going to say, okay, we've got to bomb Libya, we've got to take out their air defenses, so we've got to bomb the civilian areas, we've got to do all these things. These folks are watching the election returns almost as if it's a death verdict for their own family. And from that sense, it's great the Syrians have less to worry about of the U.S. bombing them. But it would be great if everybody in the world felt that way, including Americans.
Absolutely. I would just like to sort of reiterate some of the themes that Jim has just been saying. Is that another application of this is the hypocrisy of those who have become so irate and shocked of the claim that the Russians hacked into the Democratic National Committee, into members of Hillary Clinton's staff, released these documents either through WikiLeaks or in some other way. They're shocked that a foreign nation, a foreign government should attempt to influence the democratic political process in the United States. What the hell has the U.S. government been doing for the entire post-war period, if not when bombing or military intervening, subsidizing foreign political parties, backing opposition movements, influencing electoral outcomes in country after country after country? I mean, this is absurd to be suddenly shocked about this, because that has been America's game to try to influence the global order for the last 75 years. The fact is, all that has happened is that another country may have had the technology to try to hack in and release documents which are themselves fascinating and revealing about the hypocrisy and the contradictions and the manipulativeness of those in that political party to try to influence an American outcome, when the United States has been doing that in country after country for 75 years.
I find that to be one of the most fascinating aspects of this, and nobody seems to recognize that. They're saying the Russian hacking of these computers, emails and so forth, was a bad thing, that they were bad people to have done this. And yet the U.S. has been doing this bad thing to countries for decades. I mean, I've written a lot about the Chilean coup in 1973. What a lot of Americans don't realize is that prior to 1970, the CIA was essentially a major political party in Chile. Surreptitiously, secretly, but they were over there funding political parties to prevent Salvador Allende from ever reaching the presidency. And that was going on for like 8 to 10 years before 1970, when Allende was finally elected. And then you had all the stuff that took place after he was elected, including finally the military coup. I mean, and this has gone on time and time again, country after country, where they're involved with funding political parties, bribing politicians, having coups when people are elected that they don't like. I mean, it is a phenomenal thing. And the second aspect of this is that what they're complaining about is that Russia supposedly hacked into this thing and disclosed the truth. I mean, it's the message. If anything cost her the election, I think it's ridiculous, this notion that this cost her the election. But if anything cost her the election, it was the revelation of something that she and her people had done. And so what they're really saying is the Russians are bad people to have supposedly done this, because the American people should never have learned about Hillary Clinton and her people's corruption. That's phenomenal.
Yeah. If I can just give one more example, it became notorious after the fact that in the 1950s and 1960s, the U.S. government was subsidizing the attempt to influence the intellectual climate of opinion in Western Europe. One of them was the subsidization of a magazine called Encounter. And in fact, money being provided to authors of this magazine to try to influence the intellectual climate of opinion in Britain, in France, and other parts of Western Europe, to be aware of the communist threat. Was this not an attempt to influence the political outcomes and the attitudes and beliefs of the intellectuals who then influence political ideas in these foreign countries? The United States has done this unendingly. And suddenly, it's sort of like the scene in the movie Casablanca, when the prefect of police closes down Rick's Cafe, And Rick says, why? Why are you doing this? I'm shocked to discover that there's gambling going on here. And the croupier comes over to the prefect of police and says, you're winning, sir. I mean, it's absurd.
Yeah, and to tie this in back home here, there's the Clinton folks and others are raising Cain about hacking as the biggest offense ever as far as American elections go. But if you look at the home front here, there's a big story in the Washington Post right now about how the FBI has paid Geek Squad guys at Best Buy $500 to turn in their customers for having stuff on their computer, having images that might violate federal law. So it's like, I wonder how that's going to affect Best Buy stock prices.
Yeah, I mean, they're over here monitoring us, monitoring our emails secretly and surreptitiously, and checking to see, our telephone calls and stuff. And they're complaining about Russian hacking of Americans. I mean, are we supposed to feel better that it's our own government doing this? And I think this is one of the lessons here, is that we have mimicked a lot. It would be expected that the Russians would do something like this. It would be expected that the Chinese would do something like this. But what's happened is this is revealing the nature of what the national security establishment, the conversion of America to a national security state, has done to America. I mean, America doesn't need to be doing these things, even if other regimes are doing them. But it really goes to show how the national security establishment has corrupted the morals and values of the American people by arguing that we need to do what those people are doing to protect ourselves. Nonsense. You don't fight wrongdoing and immorality by copying it. You fight it with freedom and with limited government.
Jacob,
it's not really clear. It's not really clear that the Russians did the hack. I mean,
well, that's right.
Maybe they did, maybe they didn't. I mean, there was a good piece in the Baltimore Sun by Bill Binney, one of the former top NSA guys, and Ray McGovern, former CIA guy, who were saying it wasn't the Russians. And Bill Binney knows the technology a million times better than I do, but that's not much of a compliment. Others have raised questions, too.
All I'm suggesting is that, there's no evidence that's been produced, but what I'm suggesting is I wouldn't be surprised if they did. I mean, for one thing, Clinton was over there interfering in Russian affairs, trying to gin up protests against Putin. We've got the evidence of the U.S. government was interfering in Ukraine and that revolution. So, I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if Russia says, hey, you do it to us, we're going to retaliate. My point is that the U.S. should not be involved in this type of nefarious conduct, regardless of what other regimes are doing.
I'll just say, Jacob, that it is a long time since the early 1930s when I believe it was Henry Stimson, who was at that time Secretary of State in Hoover's administration, who, when told that the FBI was clandestinely reading diplomatic communications between embassies in the U.S. and their foreign countries, that Stimson supposedly said, this should not be done. A gentleman does not read another gentleman's mail. It's a long way since those days.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, you can just tell the dark side that America has taken by watching what dark side foreign regimes are doing, and then watching the hypocrisy of U.S. officials condemning them for doing what they've been doing and are continuing to do on a regular basis. Guys, we're about out of time. It's been fun. Jim, thanks for joining us.
Jacob and Richard, thanks for having me on. It's fun to banter this morning.
Yeah. Absolutely. I enjoyed it, too. And I just want to thank the viewers and listeners for joining us again this week.
Yep. Thank you all very much. Hope you enjoyed the show today, and look forward to seeing you all next week. Thanks for tuning in.